Redshift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. Nihilism is retarded because if there's no hope and it's just bleakness and we're all doomed and blah blah blah, that kind of nihilism. I don't know if that's all nihilism. I've never really studied nihilism, but that's some of nihilism. And that's what typically people think of as nihilism. That's what most people mean when they say nihilism, right? That's common everyday pop cultural definition of nihilism. I don't know if that's philosophical nihilism, but that kind of nihilism, that general kind of nihilism that people believe is nihilism, that bleak hopelessness, even if it's not an emotional pessimism, it's just an intellectual pessimism, a calm acceptance of this intellectual pessimistic situation that, oh, we're all doomed eventually, I say no, that is still invalid. Any kind of nihilism like that, whether it's emotional and defeatist or whether it's calm and intellectually accepting of the doomed situation, this is all bullshit because nihilism depends on an identification with the body and this individual mind. If you identify with your body and with your individual mind, then yeah, it's hopeless. You're doomed. You're going to die, right? But Buddha accepted the fact that the body dies and the mind ends. Mind consciousness comes to an end, right? That was part of his teaching, the Buddha's teaching. You have to gain insight into impermanence and into the not-self nature of all things, the anatta nature of all things, and then you can reach enlightenment. And enlightenment is perfect peace, perfect happiness, perfect wisdom, or at least liberating wisdom. What's nihilistic about happiness, right? There's nothing nihilistic about happiness. And what's nihilistic about wisdom and peace? Nothing. But more importantly, I wanted to say that nihilism depends on an identification with the body, and the mind as well. But the mind is dependent on the body, so nihilism depends on an identification with the body, but you don't have to identify with your body. You can identify with your species. You can identify with humanity, and if you identify with the human species, then no, you don't have to die, you know what I mean? Humanity does not have to go extinct. Humanity can advance technology, take to the stars, find other habitable planets, continue advancing technology, extend life until we live for hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of years, etc. Like, who says technology cannot be endlessly advanced? You know what I mean? Keep doing breeding programs, get IQs higher and higher, get lifespans longer and longer, create strong artificial intelligence to help us make advances that we cannot make ourselves. Who says we can't do that? And once we get powerful enough as a species, who says we cannot keep the universe from burning out, from becoming this cold, dead, heat-dissipated place? Who says we can't pull the universe back together so that the universe doesn't die a death of heat death? Right? Once we're basically gods, thousands or millions of years from now, there's no reason that we cannot do that. We meaning human beings, not meaning us who are alive now. We could, the human race could stop the expansion of the universe, and then we could direct how matter moves, and we could create new stars and new planets, and we could turn back entropy permanently. If we keep evolving, then in billions of years from now, we could probably do that. We could probably stop the heat death of the universe. Humanity does not have to die. So this being the case, why are nihilists identifying with their bodies? They should instead be identifying with the species, like people used to do hundreds of years ago. They used to identify with things bigger than themselves, like their religion, God, their race, or the species itself, or their family, etc. Everybody used to identify with things bigger than themselves, right? They were devoted to things bigger than themselves. But now it seems like everybody is just devoted to themselves. Now people still have families and whatnot, but people are having fewer kids. Now you can say, oh, it's because of poverty, and yeah, I do think poverty plays a big role in people having fewer kids, but I'd also say that the hedonism and the selfishness that goes along with the hedonism and the stupidity and childishness that goes along with the higher standard of living and the more hedonism and all that, the greater safety and the more pleasure, etc., maybe that just takes us back to neonatal times, psychologically speaking, when we were just perfectly secure and happy and safe in the womb. Whatever. It makes people more childish and immature and more selfish and more short-sighted and more individualistic, but in a bad way. And more hedonistic when you give them a higher standard of living. Spare the rod, spoil the child. People have less hardship these days, in a sense. And so they've been spoiled, and so they identify with themselves more than people ever did before in human history. And so identifying with just themselves has made them nihilistic, because yeah, you do have to die. You, the individual, has to die. But if they were identifying with things other than themselves, then they would not be so nihilistic. The nihilism is a result of the hedonism, which is a result of the higher standard of living and the increased safety. But also a lack of responsibility, because because everybody's being infantilized these days, and the government is doing it on purpose to make people weak so that it can control them. But if we had anarcho-capitalism, everybody would be forced to be very mature and brave and entrepreneurial and everything else, and then people would not be so childish anymore, and then they would not be so individualistic and selfish anymore, and they would not be so nihilistic anymore, and that would make them work harder and be more optimistic and hopeful, try more things, etc., and this would mean more advancement for the human species. If you just throw up your hands, oh, it's all doomed, then that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You will be doomed because you're throwing up your hands and saying we're all doomed. And, lack of action means that, yes, entropy will win if you don't fight it. But, if you identify with things other than yourself, bigger things like your race or your nation or the human species, then you're more hopeful. And being more hopeful, you will fight more. And fighting more, you will accomplish good, and you will be able to roll back entropy on this planet. And entropy will lose. And then there will be less reason to be nihilistic. So it's like, nihilism is basically a self-fulfilling prophecy in a sense. And looking at it from a Buddhist viewpoint, it's just as valid to identify with your species or your race or your genetic line or whatever. It's just as valid to identify with those kinds of things as it is to identify with your individual body and or your individual mind. Your mind is dependent on your body, and your body is dependent on food and air and stuff. And so neither your mind nor your body is actually you. And you can't stop your body from aging. You can't even make it heal by willing it to heal. Like if you get a scratch, you can't just tell your body, okay, heal that scratch. And then it heals instantly, or even in a few seconds. You can't do that. So you really have little control over your body. So how is your body you? And a lot of times people don't have control over their minds either. They can't resist addictions, attractions. They can't resist being repelled by certain things, even though those things are not harming them at all. They don't have control over their body, and they don't have control over their mind. So how is their body or their mind their self? It's not. It's just not. And, even if, they did have perfect control over their mind, they still can't raise their IQ, and they can't keep themselves from falling asleep and losing consciousness, and so their mind is not them either. Your mind is not yourself either. So what is you? There really is no you. But there is your body and mind, and there is also your actions and the consequences of your actions. And I say that what you do with what you were given, what you do with your body and mind that you were given by nature, with this body and mind you have, you can do things. You're given a body and a mind, and with that, you can do things. And if you do bad things, that's bad. And if you do good things, that's good, because doing bad deeds has bad effects. That's why it's called bad. And if you do good things, they have good effects, and that's why good is good. And if you do good things with your body and mind, then that makes you a good person. It's not about what you're given, your IQ or your health or whatever. It's about what you do with what you're given, whether you make the most of it and whether you squander it or whether you use it for good and you make the world a better place, right? But whether you do good or evil, your effects are going to live, your actions, the consequences of your actions are going to live on in ripple form, like way after you die. Maybe in such a tiny way or imperceivable way, a subtle way, that you can't even really see those effects, so it seems like your effect dies after you die, but it actually doesn't. Even if you never have kids, your effect on the world still never ends. The tiny ripples continue to affect your friends for having known you, and or your parents or any siblings you have or whatever. Your life continues to have at least a slight effect on them, and it's going to change the way they raise their kids, or it's going to change the way they think and feel, and it's going to affect the world, even if only in a tiny way. And that effect that you have on the world is your legacy. So this means that you can either identify with your body and your mind, or you can instead identify with your actions and the effects that your actions have on the world, whether those effects are perceivable or not. Now, actions have effects. Actions have effects others and their actions, which partially stems from. I either autocorrect fucked up here, or I've missed a word or two or something. I think I meant to say basically that actions have effects. And the effects of your actions affect other people, and that affects what actions they take, and then their actions have effects, etc., right? And so by affecting other people, you are affecting their actions and their effects as well, and thus you're actually having a significant effect on the world, right? So everybody is doing actions that are creating and changing the world, whether for good or ill, even though it may be in such a tiny way that they can't perceive. So you can absolutely identify with the human species, and that is just as valid as identifying with your body and mind, because identifying with the human species means you're identifying with the effects of your own actions, because those effects do ripple down through history. Maybe it's really, really obvious what Thomas Jefferson and George Washington's effect on the world were, and it's obvious what Tesla's effect on the world was, but your effects on the world are real and eternal and significant as well. They're just smaller and therefore are harder to see, maybe even impossible to see, but they're still there. Your effects on the world are still valid. They're still real. They still happen. So it's just as valid to identify with the human species by identifying with the effects that your actions have on the human species and on the evolution and future of the human species. It's just as valid to identify with that as it is to identify with your body and mind. And therefore, nihilists are foolishly choosing to identify with their body and mind instead of identifying with their actions and the effect their actions have on the world and the effect those effects will have on the future of the human species. Tipping points are real. We never know how important our actions may be. Nihilism either comes from delusion or defeatism or selfishness. So nihilism is completely invalid. It's not valid at all. Be optimistic. Be positive. Do good. Identify with the human species, not with yourself. Try to make things better. Help other people. Contribute. Spread truth. Grow wisdom. Accumulate wisdom. Pass wisdom on. Give to others if they deserve it. Found a little dynasty if you can, a eugenic dynasty, with using sperm bank sperm for half your kids so that your descendants get smarter and smarter and smarter, because you don't even have to form a commune that does that. All you need is just one other guy with a wife who's willing to do that same thing. And then you make sure that your kids marry his kids and his kids marry your kids, so that your sperm bank kids marry his biological kids and his sperm bank sperm kids marry your biological kids. And then all of you get way greater, way smarter grandkids. And then you tell, your kids to do the same thing, and you tell them to tell their kids, your grandkids, to do the same thing, and you could found a dynasty just with two couples. Two couples could do that. Just making sure their kids marry each other, right? But obviously it's going to be better if you have a bunch of people, because then you're not forcing your kids to marry certain people. You're living in a community where there's a lot of kids like that, so there's a lot of choice, you see. So, while it's possible, you'd need to have a lot of control over your kids to do it with just one other guy and his wife. Have your kids marry each other and have both couples, have kids with sperm bank sperm. Not sperm from the other guy, but sperm from a sperm bank where the guy is like 180 IQ or something, right? And this is the only way to eugenically improve the human race at any kind of decent speed. Sound money and breeding a lot and making sure your smartest kid therefore makes the most money and therefore has the most kids. This is also eugenic, but it's a very slow process. The only way to have fast eugenic progress is to use sperm bank sperm. It's the only way, because even if you are eugenic by marrying a woman who's much smarter than you, let's say you have a 110 IQ and you want to marry a woman who's got a 130 IQ so that you can be eugenic and have smarter kids than you would otherwise have. Right? Well, if she's really smart, then if she's willing to marry you, a dumber guy than her, then she's probably ugly, right? So who wants to marry an ugly girl, right? And not to mention, even if you didn't care about her being ugly, your kids are probably going to be ugly, or at least uglier than they would be if you married a dumber but prettier woman, right? And that's no good. I mean, it's probably more important to have smart kids than pretty kids today, at least if they're male. But do you really want to marry an ugly girl? And if she's smart and she's pretty, if you have a 110 IQ and you're just decent looking, or maybe better than average but not amazing looking, and you're just the average in charm and everything, then this 130 IQ girl is not going to get with you unless you have a lot of money or something. You better have something significant, or else she's not going to get with you if she's good looking, right? Because she doesn't want to be dysgenic, because you marrying her is eugenic for you, but it's dysgenic for her. You see, she's being dysgenic if she has kids with you, if she has a 130 IQ and you have a 110 IQ, especially if she's decent looking. So then the overall effect on the world is not better. It's probably worse, right? The only way for everyone to eugenically breed is to have multiple kids and have half of those kids conceived as sperm bank sperm from a very high IQ, great memory, great health, good looking guy. Then your biological kids can marry other guys as sperm bank sperm kids, and then your grandkids are far smarter than they otherwise would have been. And if all guys are doing this, then the whole human race is making massive eugenic progress with each generation. Not doing sperm bank sperm eugenics like this is gynocentric because it causes there to be fewer good-looking, fewer smart, fewer charming people in society, and then you have everybody fighting over the few people who are good-looking, charming, and smart. And this fighting results in the top men being highly desired, and thus churning and burning women and turning women into psychopaths because of emotionally damaging those women through premarital sex. And even though those guys are often not taking the women's virginity by having premarital sex with them when they're 16 or 17 because they're underage, these guys are promoting promiscuity in society and being promiscuous and setting the example, which does cause younger girls to have premarital sex with guys in their high school when they're 16, 17, right? So this is how it is. It's a situation where, yeah, the top guys, when you have fewer good-looking, fewer smart, fewer charming people in society, then this results in way greater inequality, and this results in gynocentrism, right? More good-looking, more charming, more intelligent people in society means less fighting and less inequality and less simpishness and less promiscuity, because, like, if the worst guy in society is an 8.5 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10, and the best guy in society is a 10 out of 10, like, if the lowest IQ in society were like 160 and the highest IQ in society were like 170 or 180, then that would mean that, like, women would not be going for the top 20% of guys like as much as they do today, because everybody would be almost equal. If everybody were really good looking, everybody were really intelligent, everybody were really charming, etc., then everybody would, well, there'd probably be more disparity in money, but, women do take a lot more than just money into account when they're choosing a guy. So there'd be way less SMV disparity between average guys and top guys, and thus there'd be way less gynocentrism if we had a society like this. So you could actually get rid of gynocentrism, or at least radically decrease it, just by doing the eugenic commune thing, by having half your kids with sperm bank sperm, and everybody in the commune has half their kids with sperm bank sperm. If everybody in society were doing this, or we were genetically engineering everybody in society so that everybody is highly intelligent, good looking, etc., really healthy, etc., really charming, then it would be a situation where there'd be very little inequality, and this would mean that all guys would be roughly equally attractive, and thus this would mean that there'd be way less gynocentrism. You see? Because there wouldn't be a tiny percentage of guys who are highly attractive to women. All men would be highly attractive to women. And thus all men would have way more power over women, right? And of course, this would mean, less feminism and less government and less corporate power, and women, XXers being out of the workforce. And this means, more honesty and more freedom and prosperity and happiness and virtue in society. Having less government and having government be smaller and less powerful, and having corporations be less powerful, means that there's going to be less corruption, less environmental destruction, less unjust surveillance by the NSA, and less no fiat currency. If everyone are highly intelligent, no one would tolerate fiat currency, because everyone would be smart enough to realize how stupid and evil it is. So then you'd have sound money, and then everybody would be way more prosperous, and then everybody would be way more virtuous and happy and free, right? Because they'd realize the importance of freedom as well, right? The only way to avoid nihilism is you're not deluded. That is to say, if you're not religious, because religion is delusion. The only way to be a materialist and still avoid nihilism is to identify with the human species. And to do that, you have to be focused on advancing the human species. And how do you advance the human species? Well, not just technology, not just amassing wealth for your family or whatever, or making your nation richer. The best way, the greatest power there is not health, not money, not political influence, not even memory. It's the combination of both high IQ and a really good memory. Having a high IQ and a really good memory, this is really the greatest power there is. If you have a really high IQ and a really good memory, you can do way more than someone with $200 million, because if you have $200 million and you're an average person, let's say you won it in the lotto or something, you could lose it all because you're stupid, because you're just average in IQ and memory. But if you have a really high IQ and a really, really good memory, you might be able to make $200 million on your own instead of winning it in the lotto. And having won it, having earned it instead of just won it in the lotto, you're going to be more careful to not lose it. right? Because, easy come, easy go. And consequently, difficult come, difficult go, right? And because you're smart, that also means that you're going to be less likely to lose it through recklessness or hedonism or whatever. And, even if you won it, you'd be less likely to lose it because you're smart. And even if you won $200 million and you're a smart guy and then you lost it all, because you have a high IQ and a great memory, you would be able to get rich again much easier because you have a high IQ and a great memory. And maybe you could start a new business and make $200 million all on your own this time, right? IQ and memory are potential. They're power. Money is power, but IQ and memory are greater power than money is. So if you want humanity to advance, and if you want to get freedom back, and if you want humanity to survive, then you have to do eugenics. So really, if you want to avoid nihilism, you have to do the eugenic communes thing. You pretty much have to. If you're intelligent and you see the logic that I'm talking about here, then you realize that the survival of humanity is all that matters. And you will further realize that humanity's best chance for survival is greatly improving the memories and IQs of everyone. And that the best way to do that is to use sperm bank sperm for half the kids that you raise, so as to raise your grandkids' IQs and memories by having your biological kids marry sperm bank sperm kids raised by another guy. So, it's really important that people realize this. This eugenics commune thing is super, super important. And think of how much more scientific advances, how many more scientific advances could be made, how much faster science would leap forward if everyone had 180 IQs instead of just a tiny percentage of people having 180 IQs. Imagine, not only would it make for a less feminist, less gynocentric, less tyrannical society, but it would also mean that, science is advancing way quicker, and thus standard of living is going up much quicker, and we're developing the tools to be able to deal with the damage that we've done to the environment and all kinds of other things. You see, so then humanity can survive, right? We'll make it to the stars quicker so we can find a inhabitable planet elsewhere that's not yet been fucked up by nuclear radiation and stuff, right? Nihilism is a retarded philosophy, not just because of what I said in the previous note about how it identifies. I said note because I typed it out from my voice recorder, and that was a separate voice recorder note that I recorded. Actually, those are like two different separate voice recorder notes on nihilism, and this is the third one, but I put it all together in one script, obviously, because it's all about nihilism. Nihilism is a retarded philosophy, not just because of what I said in the previous note about how it identifies with the body instead of identifying with the human race, which we could just as justifiably identify with. We can just as easily and accurately identify with the species as we can identify with our body, but nihilism is also stupid because it's not inherently valid, because it implies that, well, you're going to die, so therefore life has no meaning. But isn't the meaning of life peace and happiness and enlightenment? Peace is part of happiness, and happiness is part of peace. So isn't happiness the meaning of life? And isn't enduring happiness the meaning of life? And can't you be eternally and perfectly happy if you're immortal? If you have an immortal body, and if you're also enlightened like Buddha? Obviously, bodies are suffering, but I think that if you can overcome suffering while you're alive, like Buddha did, by becoming enlightened, then that means that the problem of the body is not actually a problem anymore, because you've overcome pain, right? In the sense that, you can be in pain, but it doesn't mentally bother you. It doesn't emotionally bother you anymore because you're enlightened. And if you're a materialist, this is just as true. But also, then you run into the problem of death. But death is not a problem if you're a materialist, because either we could attain physical immortality in the future. I don't know if it'll take 300 years or 1,000,000 years, but eventually, assuming that the human species survives, I think humanity could attain enlightenment. I mean, not enlightenment, sorry, physical immortality. I think eventually humanity could attain physical immortality. I mean, who's to say that it's impossible? These nihilists who are implying that it's impossible are just being super arrogant. Who's to say that it's impossible? It's the height of arrogance to say that immortality will never be possible at some point in the far future. So considering that, it's probably not impossible. It's probably not impossible, and we definitely cannot say that it's impossible. It might very well be possible to attain physical immortality. Some thousands of years in the future or something, right? I mean, and doesn't that bring meaning to our lives? And if not to our lives, then it definitely brings meaning to those future people's lives. They get to live forever and attain enlightenment eventually and be perfectly happy forever. Is that not a meaning in life? I mean, to say that there's no meaning in life is ridiculous, because people of the future are probably going to be immortal, and they could become perfectly happy due to having become enlightened like the Buddha was. So isn't that the meaning of life? Enlightenment and physical immortality. Won't those people of the future have achieved the meaning of life if they're perfectly happy and they live forever? Nihilism is stupid because it assumes the death of the body forever, that people are always going to die. I say no, people are not always going to die. If the human race survives, it'll probably eventually reach a technological development point where physical immortality will be accomplishable. And sure, maybe only a few people will be immortal at first, and the people at the top will hog it, but then it'll become cheaper and cheaper, and then everyone will become immortal. Or maybe we'll be overcome, inequality by that point, and everyone will be genetically engineered to be highly intelligent, highly good-looking, etc., etc. Maybe even money itself will have been abolished, and all women will have been genetically engineered to be nawalts and stuff. So then, when we attain physical immortality, there's no inequality or evil anymore, really, or not much. And so then, boom, everybody's given immortality right from the start, right? Immortality and perfect happiness are the meaning of life. And so, yeah, nihilism is stupid. Nihilism is also stupid because it says that humanity is not important. Okay, but do we know of any other species out there? No. So it's like, if we don't know of any other species out there, then what is important? Just what we know of. That's the only thing that's important. And what we know of is us. So if we're all that exists, then yeah, we are important. So it's not that we're not important, it's that they're saying that nothing is important, then so why would you fight? Right? Like, why would you make things better? Did I write that right? Sorry, 1 second here. So it's not that we're not important, it's that they're saying that nothing's important, then why would you fight? Fuck, I think I missed a word there, but basically what I was saying is that if I think I might say this later on too, forgive me if I repeat myself, but if humanity is all that exists, then we're important because we're all that exist. And if another race exists out there on some other planet, another highly intelligent race like us, then yeah, it is also important. Then that also makes what we do important because, we should connect with that race and help that race. Maybe that race needs our help to survive. And so it is important that we survive so that we can help other races out there that may not survive without us, right? So either way, whether we're the only intelligent species in the universe or we're not the only intelligent species in the universe, either way, it's the case that, like, yes, what we do is important. Nihilism seems to me to be partially just an excuse to do nothing. It's an excuse to be unvirtuous as well. Like, cheating's not that big of a deal because nothing really means anything in the end. Let humanity go extinct. Don't fight the elites. It's not worth it. It's not really that bad because nothing really means anything in the end. Humanity's not important. We're all going to go extinct, so fuck the world. You see what I mean? It's such bullshit. It's just absolutely retarded, cowardly bullshit. It's an excuse for cowardice, an excuse for lack of self-control. Since we don't know of any other intelligent species, the only thing that matters is humanity. Until we discover other species, and if there are other until we discover other species. And if there are other species out there, then if we have faith that there are species out there on other planets, then yeah, humanity is important because humanity is part of a greater whole. And everybody matters, and everything matters, and helping those other intelligent creatures on other planets is important. We're all in this together, right? Either humanity is not important because other species are important, which means that humanity is important because, it's important to help them, or humanity is the only life that exists in the universe, and therefore humanity is the only thing that's important because we're the only ones that exist. Either way, we know it. Either way, it's true that we are important, and that we owe it to either ourselves or to other people, other species on other planets. We owe it to either ourselves or to them to be responsible, to be moral, to be disciplined, and to advance technology and make it to the stars. Either for our own sake or for the sake of helping others out there. So this whole nihilistic idea that humanity doesn't matter is fucking retarded. Absolutely retarded. And it's just an excuse for bad behavior such as apathy, cowardice, immorality, etc. This has been Redshift. Hopefully someone got something out of this. Peace trucks for cowardly, hedonistic, pessimistic, vicious nihilists.